A number of House and Senate Republicans are now telling Joe Biden that they will not support additional Ukraine aid unless they get very detailed information about how our money is being spent. This comes as Joe Biden announced yesterday another $325 million for Ukraine during Vladimir Zelensky's visit. He's also asking for an additional $24 billion for the Congress to hand out to Ukraine. Joining me now is one of the senators who's concerned about how all of this money is being spent. Roger Marshall is the U.S. Senator from the state of Kansas, and he joins me on the phone. Hello, sir. Good to have you with us.
Yeah, Vince, it's great afternoon. I love your walk-in music there. Nice upbeat for Friday afternoon.
Amen. Yeah, we've got to have a good weekend. So help me out with what's going on with this Ukraine funding. I'm encouraged to see a couple of Republican senators ask for some accountability here. But why is it I think it's just 6 of you?
Well, Vince, I'm not sure how many, if you would, make them vote up or down. It would be more than that, I'm sure. But the bottom line is this. Look, we've already given Ukraine $113 billion, more than the rest of the world combined. Meanwhile, we have an open southern border. Meanwhile, we are spending $700 billion this year in interest. We don't have enough money to take care of the things we need to take care of here at home. And oh, by the way, the Biden administration has yet to put maximum banking sanctions on Ukraine either. So there's so much more that they can do. They've slow-walked this from day to day. It looks like to me that Joe Biden wants another 7-year war. So there's a lot of us that are pretty frustrated. I know the people of Kansas are very frustrated.
So we are operating at a massive deficit right now. And in other words, we don't have enough tax receipts to pay for government spending, which means if we were to cut another $24 billion for Ukraine, that would have to be printed money. Is that correct, Senator?
You got it. Let's just put an exclamation mark on this. The federal government this year alone is going to spend $2 trillion more than we take in from taxes and revenue. So we're upside down $2 trillion, $700 billion of that is in interest. And then what's the federal government do? They basically borrow money from China. They start printing money, and inflation continues. Interest rates stay up. It's a vicious cycle created by Joe Biden's policies.
Sure. And if we're going to send money to Ukraine, one of the key questions you would ask is how is that money being spent? Do you feel like you have clarity on that as a United States Senator?
Not yet. This is an interesting point. Rand Paul put an amendment on the floor to say we want our own inspector general to take care of just this money that's going to Ukraine. Ukraine has a long history of corruption. I just did a little tour through Europe talking to other leaders over there, and they describe Ukraine still as a very corrupt country. They have a corrupt culture. What happens when there's this much money being thrown at them day after day? They don't know where it's going. And just think about the people that he's cleaned house with there very recently. So many of his cabinet he just recently fired. So, no, I'm not convinced at all where this money is going.
Yeah, and you mentioned, you've got all these defense ministers that were just canned by the Zelensky administration ahead of his visit, presumably they claim all the reports are for corruption, that they were skimming off the top all of this money that the United States was sending in. When does the American people get a report of what actually happened there, or are we just supposed to take Zelensky's word for it?
Well, it's interesting. The report we got actually was, don't worry about it. It was just Ukrainian money that they stole. So don't worry about it.
Come on. We're funding their entire government. We're paying all of their salaries and their pensions.
Yeah, I have no answer for you, Vince. There's just no way. There's too much money coming through. We know that when the federal government makes a big monetary dump like this, no one can keep track of it. We saw it happen with all the COVID money going out, all the fraud that went on with this. It's just impossible. Too many people out there with sticky fingers.
Yes, absolutely. Another weird headline that I saw about Ukraine this week is that, I'm just quoting from the BBC, but this headline's all over the place. Poland is no longer supplying weapons to Ukraine amid grain row. There's a dispute, a diplomatic dispute over Kiev's grain exports. And so Poland has decided it's no longer going to send weapons to Ukraine. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Senator, but I thought one of the rationales for why we're even involved in the war in Ukraine is to prevent Russia from attacking Poland. But if Poland's not going to send them weapons, why should we?
Yeah, exactly. And Poland's president yesterday, I'm not sure if you saw his quote, but he described Ukraine as like a drowning person. And when a person is drowning, they reach out and grab other people and take them down with them. And he was warning the rest of the world that he doesn't want to be taken down with Ukraine. I think the most recent meaningful reports suggest that this is going to be a 7-year war, not a 7-month year war as well. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be, do we as the United States feel like that we can send $100 billion every year to Ukraine to fund this war of theirs? So here's Poland, who's probably got the best feet on the ground, their fingertips on the pulse. I went to Poland just months after this war broke out to see for myself what was going on. And they were just inundated with refugees from Ukraine, working on the food part of this, finding them housing. Boy, if they've given up already, that's not a good sign.
Well, it may also be that they realize that the United States will do this regardless of European input. Because, if I can contrast the two administrations we're looking at here, during the Trump era, Donald Trump gets NATO countries to put a lot more money into defense spending to meet their obligations. Meanwhile, Joe Biden seems to be just cutting checks left and right. And not expecting Europe to live up to its end of the bargain to protect Europe.
Yeah, Vince, it sounds like you're on my trip with me talking to European leaders just about a month ago, and that's exactly was the question. Their biggest concern is that if Donald Trump gets reelected, does that mean we're not going to continue to fund the war, and it's going to make them spend more money? They didn't care about anything else. The only thing they worried about was the United States going to keep funding the war and basically imply that as long as we're funding it, why should they worry about it? So you are spot on. There's certainly nothing that I've heard differently from my boots on the ground.
Let me shift to another topic that I know is of concern to you. Our southern border is in complete chaos. That has been true for a long time, but the images of humanity just pouring across it now are so overwhelming that I don't think you can ignore it anywhere. Sir, what are you concerned with right now? What answers are you looking for on our border crisis?
Well, we need to start with just holding Secretary Mayorkas in contempt and do some type of a impeachment trial on him. We do have an open border. We're still seeing 9,000, apprehending 9,000 people a day. That means there's another 3,000 gotaways. My biggest concern, more recent concern, is the number of Chinese nationalists crossing our border. Over 18,000 Chinese nationalists, young, healthy men and women, have been caught and released at our border. And then you would guess another 6,000 gotaways. So we have this 24,000 Chinese nationalists infiltrating our schools, into the research centers, working in big tech, learning what we know about artificial intelligence. So they are stealing our technology and poisoning our children. Mm-hmm. I still think that our open southern borders is the number one most immediate threat to our national security that exists. Yes. Again, which is why I've said no Ukraine funding until we secure our own border.
Also, there are a couple issues that stand out to me that suggest that Mayorkas should be impeached immediately, and I think the American public would be on board with this. And among them are all of the people who keep dying trying to cross into the United States. There are a lot of bodies that keep washing up on shore as people try and make that treacherous journey. A 3-year-old this week just drowned in the Rio Grande, and they found the body of the child. A woman fell to her death trying to cross the border wall last week, just fell from that height. There's over 100,000 American deaths here in the United States due to the fentanyl crisis and the other drugs that are pouring in from the cartels. You've got child slave labor going on in the United States as you have some of these migrants working off their debts to the cartels, and you have sex and human trafficking going on. What other atrocities do I need to list before you can impeach the Secretary of Homeland Security?
And Vince, you're understating the problem. I know sometimes the media might be have some hyperbole, but you're actually understating the problem that I've seen on the border myself. Been down there 4 times, and there is a humanitarian crisis going on because of this beacon we have saying, look, bring everybody, bring them now, come to the border. And because of them, I'm going to emphasize and talk about the human trafficking just for a second. Right. We are seeing an explosion of human sex trafficking. It's actually more profitable even than the drugs. So as near as we can tell, the cartel has made some $30 billion over the past year with human trafficking. And they put them into some type of indentured servitude where they'll say, we'll get you safely to the United States in return for 3 or 5 years of working in hotels, working in the food industry, that type of thing. Many of the young boys and girls sold into the sex slavery component of this as well. It is an atrocity. It is just a human tragedy in so many levels. I do not know how Joe Biden goes to sleep at night, knowing that that's going on. And then, like you said, every day, 300 Americans dying from fentanyl poisoning.
Senator Marshall, we've heard stories of young girls, I'm talking children, being given birth control in order to make their journey into the United States because of the likeliness that they will be sexually assaulted or raped as they take the journey. Do you know how prevalent that is, and why isn't there more conversation on that?
Well, in my discussions with the Border Patrol officers, probably even a majority of the young boys and girls are being sexually assaulted on the trip. Now, what percentage of those are sold into human trafficking, it's hard to tell. But the typical story is you would have this 27-year-old cartel member escorting them across and say, oh, this is my daughter. This is my 15-year-old daughter. As well. And that's why we got some DNA testing down there to help our Border Patrol officers out. It's hard for me to estimate it, Vince, but it's very significant. And again, it's their number one money driver now.
And then finally, you mentioned Chinese nationals who are pouring across the border. I know you've been raising concerns about that. Why would that happen? Why would there be Chinese nationals coming across the southern border?
Well, I'm going to have to make my theory is that of course, the fentanyl precursors made in China, the cartel brings them across the border. And by the way, there are cartel pods across the state of Kansas, and I'm sure many other states as well. And then they have to collect the money from selling the fentanyl. And then these Chinese nationalists are then money laundering it. A lot of it they're wanting done in crypto, and then to send it back to the homeland as well. So that would be one reason. And the other reason, of course, is just to infiltrate our intelligence, to infiltrate our universities where we're doing research. They still our intelligence, they steal our intellectual property, and then in return they poison our children.
But the numbers are staggering. I didn't know until I saw your letter on this subject that Chinese nationals being encountered at our southern border. Last year it was 2,000. This year it is 18,000 in this fiscal year alone. 18,000 so far. That's not a statistical quandary. That is, somebody is making an active decision to send a lot more Chinese nationals across our border.
Yeah, and the poor Border Patrol, they're inundated, so they're catching and releasing these people. Remember, this is the Biden policy. We catch them, release them with minimal investigation into who these people are. Yeah. And I guarantee you a lot of these are going to end up as basically secret agents. And again, the ability for them to hop into some of our high-tech companies and hop in there and start learning what we're doing is astounding. And don't forget the gotaways. If there's 18,000 they've apprehended and released, there's another 6,000 gotaways. And those would be the really scary criminals, I'm afraid.
Impeachment can't come quickly enough for all sorts of people. Senator Roger Marshall, I'm so grateful for your time today and your assessment of all of this. Thank you very much, sir.